to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast with financial planner and retirement specialist Dan Haylett. In this podcast, Dan explores ways to help you overcome the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Join Dan for the journey where he will explore how our wonderful human brain will naturally fight against what it takes to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement. Dan will draw on years of expertise, experience and expert guests to solve the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett, and today's show is a very special one and a first for the Humans vs. Retirement podcast, as you get two for the price of one, as I get to sit down with the amazing double act of Lyle Sussman and David Dabowski. Lyle and David, a very, very warm welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Can't wait to have this conversation. It's the first, as I said, the first double act on. So this is amazing. I can't wait to kind of dive into to your brains and your research and your writing and your work. We had a wonderful conversation a couple of weeks ago to set up this podcast episode. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I know there's going to be a huge amount of value that's going to come out of it. So, Lyle and David, you are co-authors of a great book called Your Total Wealth, The Heart and Soul of Financial Literacy. You're both acclaimed writers, speakers on the subjects of money and behaviours. You've held and hold very senior positions at some of the top universities in America. David, you officially retired 2020.
That is correct, yes,
yep.
During COVID. COVID-induced.
Yeah, so I'd love to explore that with you a little bit as well. How that kind of felt during that period. And Lyle, you're Professor Emeritus at the University of Louisville, where you spent, I think, the vast bulk of your career. So I'd love for you guys just to spend a couple of minutes each just talking through how you got to where you are, the intersection of money and behaviors, how you got together to write that great book. Lyle, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, I'm now emeritus. In 2009, David and I published an article in the Journal of Financial Planning, which was a survey of approximately 1,300 financial planners. And interestingly enough, so it was published about 14 years ago, but David and I are still getting citations to that piece, and we are still getting comments saying that we had an impact on changing the field. And basically, what David and I found was that the role of the financial planner is changing from purely financial analytics to coaching and life planning. And David was a financial analytics guy, and I was the psychology, human relations guy. And that's the yin-yang approach that we took. So the reason the three of us are on this conversation is because of that research that was published in 2009.
Yeah, I still remember when we were at University of Louisville, and we were just chatting, drinking coffee in the hallway and just chatting about how difficult it is for individuals to talk about money. And once they start talking about money, it opens up the floodgates to, if you can talk about money, you can talk about everything. And that's what led to our survey of financial planners, and several financial planners confirmed that, once their clients started talking about their money problems, a whole litany of problems came about. They started talking about their family problems, their children's problems, their personal problems. But it's the linchpin was talking about money.
Yeah, and interestingly, Dan, one of the quotes, and I know David has used this a number of times, is that, and this came from an advisor, that one of the most important tools for an advisor is a box of Kleenex, a box of tissues. You need an Excel spreadsheet, but you also need something to help a client when they are experiencing some very strong emotional issues.
Money is such an emotive subject, and it's a lightning rod for those emotions. And I think it flows through and touches more of our lives than any other thing that we can imagine. And I know that for a couple, particularly coming into our office, I would imagine, and actually couples have said this to not to this effect, but said the word similar. They'd almost rather be talking about their sex life than their money life, right? That's how emotive their money is. It's a taboo subject to talk with other people, and I think we'll get onto this in a bit with biases, but that's just learned behavior, isn't it? That's just kind of stuff that we've seen and learned, and money's been taught to us to be this very secret thing that we shouldn't share because it has so many emotions across so many aspects of our lives. I couldn't agree more. I probably think you need a bigger box of Kleenex than you do a big spreadsheet, right? I think that it's definitely weighting towards the Kleenex right now.
It's interesting, Dan. I spend a fair amount on LinkedIn on a regular basis, and I'm fairly active in the community of professional financial advisors, and that includes fiduciaries and CPAs and tax accountants, etc. And what I'm seeing is that there are almost as many posts regarding communication and empathy and emotional intelligence as there are posts related to how to leverage taxes, how to leverage asset allocation. It's becoming almost a 50-50 split.
And one of the results we found in our survey is about 1/4 of the time of a typical financial planner is spent on non-financial issues of their clients, dealing with their personal problems, life problems, family problems, and non-financial issues. And someone did a survey in Australia and concluded that 25% is probably underestimating the amount of time that financial planners spend on non-financial issues of their clients.
It's interesting, David just said is that our research is now serving as a springboard for other researchers taking our basic findings and amplifying them and extending them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think your research you done back in 2009, although it doesn't seem that long ago, I think in the world of financial planning, it's a lifetime ago, because, what we do now and how we are getting involved and more confident to be involved in what I think are, it is money orientated, but it goes deeper than that. It's what, it's those kind of emotive subjects and the non-financial issues. Back in 2008, 2009, if you said you were going to do that, other financial professionals would look at you as if you're crazy. So, that work you did was groundbreaking then. It's provided the foundations for others, as you said, to take on parts of that, dig a bit deeper and go. So just amazing work. And I think, and I think we're going to touch on this a bit, but I'll touch on this a lot. I don't think personally I've come across, and obviously my lane is very much dealing with people that are, what I call kind of crafting their second lives, thinking about retirement and thinking about that part. And both of you might be in a good position personally to kind of answer this question, but I don't think there is more of an emotive time when it comes to money than at that stage of our lives, when we're transitioning from a career and transitioning from an accumulation mindset to what am I going to do when I've got time and freedom? How am I going to spend my time? How am I going to spend my money? Oh, and by the way, I'm depleting my capital. The whole emotions around that is now, it is so alien to people. And that's kind of my premise, that humans are not wired for a modern day retirement because we simply aren't wired for this thing that now we're asking everyone to go into. Does that resonate?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it does. And it resonates on a couple of levels. One is that all of our lives are lives of journeys. As we get older, we're always on a journey. And different points of those journeys are crisis points. And money and finances necessarily are going to have an impact on how we manage those crises. Whether we get that when we get married, when we choose on a career, when we decide, for some cases, not to be married anymore, divorce, when we go into retirement. So it resonates with that. And the other issue, and I'm seeing this more and more, especially with regards to artificial intelligence, the impact of social media and the impact of being inundated with so much information about money and about choices and about how to handle your finances is creating its own crisis.
Absolutely. One of my favorite sayings around that is that if all I needed was information, I'd be a millionaire and have a six pack. Because it's there, isn't it? I mean, it's all there, but the wisdom to put the bricks together and actually apply it to life is really challenging.
Yeah, the information about money is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And that's the basic premise of the book, that of course you need money, unless you choose to be a hermit in a cave. But most people don't do that. So yes, you need to simply to sustain life. But the notion of life, L-I-F-E, means much more than money.
I have two comments that this conversation have triggered thoughts of. Number one was something I read. Well, they're both things that I read recently online. One is that people are more afraid about, after they retire, they're more afraid about running out of money than they are about dying itself.
Wow.
And the other, perhaps linked together, is the issue of longevity literacy. And about a month ago, there was a survey released by TIAA, which is a financial organization that deals mostly with university professors. But TIA and a center at George Washington University did a survey of longevity literacy and people's savings habits, and found that people who were aware, the longevity literacy issue is basically that you're probably going to live longer than you think. You don't realize that when you're 70 years old, chances are you're going to live for another 20 years. And there's even a possibility you'll live 30 years. And people don't realize that, well, when you retire, you've got, if you retire at age 65, you may have 25, 30, 35 more years of life in front of you. And the knowledge of that fact is highly correlated with people's savings decisions and money management decisions while they are working.
And he's checking on that comment, David. The knowledge of the fact that at age 70, you might have another 25, 30 years can be terrifying for some people, because they are now concerned about, will they be cognitively alert? Will they be able to simply survive? Who's going to take care of them? There are very many issues that are going to come up at that stage, which they never thought about at age 50.
Absolutely. I think that there's a drawing behind me. This is one of my favorite ones I did in the middle here. And I think this kind of lifespan versus health span thing is really important, isn't it? I think it's, when it comes to the psychological impact of retirement and being post 60, I think marrying the data and the numbers with the fact that, yes, we might be living longer, but we're not necessarily healthy longer. I read a great piece of research that says exactly that. It says actually the time that we are healthy actually hasn't changed that much. The time that we are alive has changed dramatically because medicine has kept us alive, but it doesn't actually mean we are physically and cognitively able to kind of have the health to do things. And it was a fascinating read to kind of go, that it's about making sure that we are aware about longevity, but also aware that there's probably only still a window of opportunity to be able to spend the money and spend the time on things that are important.
And Dan, this conversation is triggering a lot of thoughts. and I'm glad, and I thank you for that, and David. The concept that I keep thinking about right now is the concept of protection and security. On a personal level, I have an advisor, and these were the first two questions that my advisor asked Susan and me. Susan's my wife. The first question was, do you have long-term care insurance? It was the very first question he had. Do you and your wife have long-term care insurance? And the second question he asked is, do you have powers of attorney? And the second question assumes that at some point, you may not be as smart as you think you are, and you might do something stupid, and you have to make sure that there's someone in your life that will protect you from doing something stupid.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation I have a lot with people. The assumption that your spouse can act on your behalf is wrong. It's like, you need powers of attorney to be in place to allow even your spouse to act in your interest when it comes to in the UK, we've got two lasting power of attorneys. You've got a health and welfare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. So they're split into two. And so if you need to, and on both fronts, health span and spending money, if you need someone to make a decision for you financially because cognitively you're in a position that you can't make that, they can't do it unless they're in place. And if we are living longer, the chances are that we are going to have cognitive decline. So you need to make sure that's in place. And you need to make sure that your loved ones can make decisions based on your health as well, if you're unable to make those. So important. And I say to a lot of people, obviously a will is very important for when you're not here, but actually maybe more important is the powers of attorney, because this is decisions that will be affected when you're still here, and things that, you might even break both your arms and you can't sign anything. I mean, it doesn't have to be dramatic and morbid, and it can be very simple things that people need to act on.
And relate to that again. If you look at the kinds of posts that are on LinkedIn from the financial services community, you are seeing evidence that the role of the financial advisor really is changing. They're asking more questions about long-term care, about security, about protecting yourself against scammers, because this is a huge problem right now.
We're going to come on to that. I think we had a great conversation last week about scammers. I want to touch on that. Look, I mean, this has been a wonderful opening to the show. I love this, and we there's so much more to talk about. So look, I can't think of two better people to have on the show to talk about this stuff, right? I'm privileged that you guys can join me. I know we had a bit of tech problem before, but we're here and we're talking. So this is wonderful. And so again, I can't think of two better people to talk about how humans are not wired for a modern day retirement, and how to talk about overcoming that challenge. And I want to touch on something. Your book, Your Total Wealth, it's a great book, and I'm going to put links to it in the show notes, and links to the website that you've got to accompany it with all the other resources. And you very kindly sent me a pre-retirement assessment that both of you have put together, which I think is fantastic, that touches on a number of key questions around financial and non-financial elements of thinking about work. I want to ask you both the same question actually, because in the introduction of the assessment I've got here, I want to read this sentence out. You say retirement planning typically considers only your financial needs, but there are many non-financial issues that should be considered as well. Your emotional, psychological, and social needs. I want to come back to that because I think it's so important. The best retirement planning looks into the future from a perspective of total wealth. I really want to know from both of you, David, let's go for you first. What's your definition of total wealth when it comes to kind of retirement or thinking about life after work?
Well, wealth, I mean, obviously there's financial wealth and you have to have some money to enjoy retirement. But, wealth goes way beyond just financial issues. There family, friends, spirituality, The list goes on and on. Towards the end of the book, we have a list, it's a whole page long, that says, are you wealthy or not? And well, if you have all of these things below, or most of these things below, then you are more wealthy than you think. But you have to have happiness, you have to be able to laugh, you have to have a support system, have a sense of giving back, doing things that are productive. I feel in my retirement, which has only been 3 years, I've balanced, shall I say, the useful aspects of life and doing things, along with the, shall we say, the lazier things of just being able to listen to music or read a book. And I really do like the balance of both of these yin and yang aspects of retirement.
And Dan, let me take, and thank you for asking that question. That's a crucial question on many levels. My definition of total wealth is it includes everything David just said, but I am focusing now on relationships, both family and extra family. That it's very, very interesting, and I can't speak about obituaries in England, but if you look at obituaries in our country, obituaries that appear in newspapers, about 80% of the content of a typical obituary mentions the people that the deceased person was connected with. Typically, it's family members, but every now and then there'll be colleagues at work or friends or associations that person might have been involved with. And that to me is a very, very telling kind of anecdotal data that if you wanted to summarize someone's life, it would be, who did that person touch? How did that person affect other people? And how did those other people feel about that person? There's an old joke, and I can't give you the source of it, but the essence of it is, when you die, you want to make sure people cry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the great things about being a professor or being a teacher is just how many lives you touch, and there are so many lives that I know I've touched because they've personally, former students have gotten back in touch with me and thanked me for what I've done for them. But on top of that, I'm sure that there's other former students that haven't, and yet I know in some small way, just the fact that they were successful in life and they were a former student, tells me that they, I had a small impact on their success in life, and that's a very gratifying feeling.
Absolutely. And David, you're a friend and a colleague and a co-author, but that makes you a wealthy person.
Yes, all that contributes and going well beyond financial wealth. Family, friends, having the ability to think, competence, the ability to read and understand. I mean, all these are things we take for granted, but they all contribute to your wealth, which are just these assets that you have that are valuable to you, and they're non-tangible assets, but they are assets nonetheless.
And it's interesting, Dan, and I assume you're finding this in England specifically, maybe Europe generally. In this country, we're seeing a rise of communities that are targeted specifically for senior citizens. So you get a community of people 65 years and older who are simply coming together for the social bond, for the social value of being with other people. The evidence of it is everywhere.
I really wanted to go here, so I'm glad we've gone here. I love this because I think that the bit that I pulled out of that introduction was, so your emotional, psychological, and social needs. And I've read the Harvard study the famous 85-year Harvard study, and there was two pieces of information I took from that. One was they found that social connections was the number one reason for happiness. That kind of bottom line. So, and they also found that the number one challenge for retirement was losing your social connections that you had at work.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There are two comments I want to make about that, Dan, about that
Harvard
study. My reading of that cohort is almost everyone in that sample was financially wealthy. So money wasn't an issue. These were people who over 34 or 50 years had 7, 8, maybe 7 or 8 figure portfolios. So money was not the issue. And the other issue in terms of what they lost, they were seeing some members of their cohort dying, so it's not just losing physical; it's actually losing someone who no longer exists.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a big thing to think about, isn't it? As we approach into our retirements, you might not just lose touch with people, your close friends and family. You're at a point in life where those relationships have to probably be cherished more than what they ever have been, because that's the stage of life that we're at. And I think I think it's such an important takeaway that one of the things that we need to ensure that we cultivate leading into our retirement, and probably work harder than we've ever had to work post our retirement, is ensuring that we have our tribe. We know who our tribe is, and we know what they want to be like. We might have a couple of different tribes in different social connections. I've heard anecdotally how people that I've worked with and other people, that they've intentionally gone down the generations. So they're not just dealing with, I'm not just 65 and I'm going to go and search out other 65-year-olds that like playing golf. I want to go and hang around with some 30-year-olds. I want to go and hang around with some 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds. Maybe a common interest like golf or whatever that is. But I want to make sure that I'm still keeping things sharp, and I can get a view from everyone. So I think social connections, I think, are the number one thing that most people that are leaving a career need to work on, whether it's retaining them through what you've got already or working on them going forward. And this comes back to your yin and yang of it, right? The yin being the money or the finances, and the yang being personal fulfillment. I think it's such an important kind of separation.
Thank you. I want to make one point about the social connections. During our careers, so the 25, 30, 35, 40 years an average person spends in a career, contacts are almost automatic. So you're dealing with coworkers, you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with vendors. The contacts are almost default. Yeah. They're automatic. But when you retire, they're not there anymore.
You don't have to go hunting for them, do you, at work? Don't have to go hunting for them. No.
No. They're only going to be there if you make an effort to make them there. And the loss of that is emotionally painful. It is emotionally painful. So, and I think most people underestimate the emotional cost of that loss. They assume that, well, I've been very active in my professional life. I'll be active when I retire. So I'll have these friends, and they'll play golf, or I'll play cricket, or I'll play pickleball, whatever I'm going to do. But I'll still have these friends. But that's not the case. That's not the case. You leave a professional career, you leave an automatic network of contacts.
David, has that been any kind of personal experience over the last 3 years for you around that?
There were a couple, yes.
After I retired, so the first year in retirement was spent writing the book with Lyle, Your Total Wealth, and publishing it. We self-published it and marketing it. In the second year in retirement, we moved from Texas to Virginia, and reestablishing our lives, here in Virginia took up most of the time. So in terms of having free time, this issue has only really emerged in the past year, the third year of retirement. And like I said before, I've been balancing. There are things I enjoy doing by myself. I have reading, playing the guitar, and these things keep me busy for sometimes a couple of hours a day. And but at the same time, I have my network of friends here that we get together for lunch every once in a while. And I'm a CFA, a chartered financial analyst holder, a charter holder, CFA charter holder. And once or twice a month, there are events that I very much enjoy going to. And as you said, meeting individuals who are in their 30s and 40s. I mean, a typical event there will have maybe 80 people show up, and believe me, I'm in the older decile of people when I go to these events. But it's a lot of fun, talking and illuminating, talking to kids who are in their 30s and 40s and just starting out in life. And learning what they do and how they deal with people and making not financial decisions for themselves. All these are financial professionals, so they are making financial decisions for others.
And Lyle, to me, that kind of resonates with I think we as humans, we like to give back. And I think mentoring and feeling like we're in a position where we can dispose of our knowledge and our experience, and that makes us feel pretty cool, right? I mean, that makes us feel nice. We were in an environment where we've gathered a career worth of information, and to be in a position to feel like we can give some of that back freely without worrying about any consequences. It's kind of like, I get paid $250, £250 an hour for it doesn't matter now, right? It's kind of, you can give freely away, and that's a lovely thing. And we like that as human beings, right? That's how we've been wired to kind of act.
Interesting. There's a quote that I use periodically, which is, and I think interestingly enough, I think the source is Winston Churchill. And Churchill said, "We make a life by what we get. We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give." Mm-hmm. We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. And that's essentially what you're just saying. And that's why the notion of volunteering makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. It allows you to create a social network. It allows you to recognize your self-worth. Because another thing that happens when people get older is they start discounting what they're good at. Because once you start losing some mental acuity, you say, gee, I'm not as smart as I once was. I don't make decisions the way I once was. Maybe I don't have the value anymore. And the beauty of volunteering is there are people who appreciate your knowledge. So and the currency is not financial. The currency there is people saying, thank you. That's that currency. And there's real value in that currency.
Just this morning, I was speaking. I'm the chair of the finance committee for my HOA, but we also have a treasurer who's on the board of directors of the HOA. And I was speaking with him, and he thanked me for giving him advice and telling him when he's wrong and when he's right, and discouraging him from going down certain paths and encouraging him going down other paths. And of course, it's easy for me to do that because I'm not on the board. So giving my advice is cheap. But I felt very, very good that he went out of his way to thank me for the wisdom I've been able to provide to him. I remember there was one issue where the issue was what should be our deductible for our insurance policy here, and we had been up at $10 million, and he was arguing, that we should go down to $5 million. And I said to him, if anything ever happened and we got sued for $10 million, you'd never be able to live with yourself, knowing that, you bankrupted the HOA. So, this is something that's going to cost every household an extra $2 a year in our neighborhood. So, I mean, don't fight this and just stick with the $10 million that we have.
A couple of points really for me. I think it shows that there's always a look for what the optimization, optimizing numbers, isn't there? There's always that, let's optimize the numbers. But actually, when we try and optimize emotions and we try and optimize, a bit like the story you said, it's kind of, well, actually, if you bring feelings into this, how would you feel if, and how would you feel if that, and I think, decisions around our money are much better made with feelings taken into account than they are with what the spreadsheet says is optimal. And I think that to me leads us lovely. I mean, we explored in our conversation a couple of weeks ago around kind of common behavioral biases and heuristics that we will probably be more will show up more in our lives when we do reach retirement and we're kind of in that second phase, or be senior citizen, whatever we want to call ourselves, when we're kind of post work. And we've touched on a couple. I think like life literacy, financial literacy is one that we've kind of touched on a bit. I think that absolutely raises its head. But I'd love for you to talk about a couple of, I think we had a great conversation around loss aversion, which I think is really something to bring up around how that shows its head and some of the reasons why it does and what it means. I'd love for us to touch on that for 5, if that's good.
Sure. Let me pick that up first. The basic finding of loss aversion is that we feel worse about losing money than we feel good about making money. So it's a behavioral finance bias, but and clearly everyone feels bad about losing. But what happens when people get older is they realize that there is an end date, that they understand that they're not going to live forever. Someone who's 20 years old doesn't think about their death. Someone who's 65, 70, 75 does think about their death. So the issue of what they're losing becomes more dominant. It simply moves up it moves up into their to-do list. This is what I'm thinking about that I didn't think about before. And this gets back to our issue about losing friends, and David pointed about they're more afraid about losing money than dying. They want to make sure they have it. They start, and if they have a marriage, they are looking at how their spouse is starting to lose some of his or her health. They're starting to look at loss. So yes, loss aversion cuts across all ages, but it becomes more paramount. It becomes more of an issue among senior citizens.
What I've always found most fascinating about loss aversion is the fact that framing a question in loss terms versus gain terms can make people make different decisions. If I asked you, do you want to get a vaccination, and gave you statistics on if you get this vaccination, what is the probability that you're going to live, and expressing everything in terms of life and number of years you have to live if you get this vaccination, versus if I gave you the same question, do you want to get a vaccination, but instead talk to you about in terms of you're going to, what's the chance you're going to die and what's the probability you're going to die, which is in loss terms. And people will make different decisions about getting that vaccination purely on the basis of how that question was framed. Is it in a positive gain mode, life, or is it in a negative loss mode, death?
I think also there how the same question can be interpreted differently in our 60s than would be in our 30s as well. The framing. So again, I think we have to frame things differently as we get older, because again, like you say, if we are more aware of loss, and I think part of this for me is when we're younger, loss. I think the hurt still happens, but in the back of our minds, we've got more chance of getting it back. So whether it's money or friendships or love, whatever we lose, if we lose something in our 20s or our 30s, we're going, don't worry, I've got a chance of getting that back. If we lose a friend, not through death, but just say they move away, we've got more chance of making, because we're in those social circles, of making another friend. If we lose 50% of our portfolio, we've got more chance of making it back. If we lose something in our 60s, we've got less time, less chance of getting that back. So in fact, it might hurt even more. Therefore, framing is even more. And I'd be interested to think about this going forward. Is there ways to think about loss aversion? That's probably been done, but loss aversion, particularly for people in that, we're saying that losses hurt about twice as much as gains give us pleasure. My gut instinct is losses might hurt 3 times or 4 times as much as what gains give us pleasure in our 60s, because I do think that we are cognitively aware that we haven't got the time to or capacity or want or desire to go and put the hard work in to get the thing back.
It's interesting, Dan, if you look at the marketing material that are used by these communities that are trying to attract senior citizens, you're seeing the same basic theme. On the one hand, you've got 70-year-olds who are thinking about downsizing, but they don't want to lose the space that is so comfortable for them. They've been in a house for 20, 30, maybe 40 years. They got pictures on the wall. They got clothes in their closet. They have memories of Christmas and Thanksgiving and other holidays with family members and friends. They can't imagine moving to a place that physically is half that size. They think they're going to lose too much. But on the flip side, the marketing material used by communities trying to attract those people is, this is what you're going to gain. This is what you're going to gain. You're going to have friends. And what's interesting is what those messages have in common is you're going to gain friendship. You're going to gain activities with people. And that too is kind of a yin-yang.
Mm-hmm.
Let me also add that there's a lot of evidence out there that it's not only clients and individual investors who are loss averse, but financial advisors are also loss averse, both in terms of their own personal decisions, but also in how they deal with clients. For instance, there are many loss averse advisors that really should cut their losses when it comes to holding on to a client. And yet, rather than jettisoning, if that's the right word, but abandoning that client and saying this client is just too much work or too much of a hassle, too much of a pain, they will spend an inordinate amount of time continuing to deal with that individual. And that's evidence of a loss-averse advisor.
It's interesting, David. And then this is an issue that I'd like the professional community and advisors to consider. I'm wondering if there's a potential disconnect between a 30-year-old advisor and a 65-year-old client. A 30-year-old advisor intellectually can talk about loss aversion and what it might feel like to be old. But does a 65-year-old feel that a 30-year-old really understands that? There's something to be said for a 30-year-old advisor increasing his or her appreciation for what it means for a 65-year-old client to experience kind of things that we're talking about now.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's a really interesting topic. I've had comments from clients along these lines, and it basically, so I'm 40. What am I? I'm 41, and I've had comments from clients saying I'm just about right, i.e., I'm not. I'm old enough to kind of understand it, and so kind of empathize directly with their situation, although they appreciate that my kind of reading and expertise and understanding is solely where they're at. And I'll come back to that. But also what's really interesting for me is that they want longevity in me and my team and my company. And because they're going, well, actually, the chances are that I die before my wife. let's just kind of let's pretend that that's the situation. And so I want someone to be there. So what I don't want actually is someone older than me that might die before me, because then because actually I want someone to deal with my wife, and I want someone to deal with my children that I trust. So it's a really interesting dynamic for people searching out advisors and planners at this stage, because I do agree, Lyle. I think they want someone that can empathize with their situation, but they also want someone that they feel like there's 15 or 20 years in them and their business to see them, their wife or their husband and their children through the transitions that they're going to go through. And I totally agree with you. And I'm giving a couple of presentations to advisors over the next couple of weeks about this, about how I think retirees have been the most sought after demographic for financial advisors because they have money. Ironically, they've been the most underserved because all the financial advisors have done typically is focus on the money. We need to deal with people, what I call retirement rebels, people that are not going to retire, i.e. sit on their couch for 15 years. We need to understand the new dynamic of people stepping back from a career or full-time work into their second lives, the fact that they want to use their health while it's there, the fact that there is increased longevity, all of these things that we've been talking about, I think so important for people to understand. So I think it's I think it's a really interesting dynamic when someone in their mid-50s, early 60s is going to search out a financial advisor to help them and their family through what is, again, think about longevity, which is going to be a multi-decade relationship with them and their family.
I have a personal story you may find interesting. About a few years ago, when Susie and I wrote our will, I asked a very, very close friend in Louisville if he would be our executor. And he said, Lyle, I'm older than you are. I think you would want someone to be an executor who would actually be alive when you and Susan went out here. And I said, you're right. I should look for an executor who will be alive to actually execute the will.
I think it's really important questions. I think it's really important questions for the listeners out there that are thinking about working with an advisor and a planner. I think the questions that what you'd want to know is that, the future of them as an individual, where their expertise lies, but also the future of the business, right? I mean, there's a big thing going on in the UK at the moment where lots of financial advisors, the average age of a financial advisor is still well in their 60s. A lot of them are selling their businesses and getting out of the, they're retiring like they've told a lot of their clients to and all that stuff. So it's not necessarily that the advisor dies. It might be that the advisor just isn't there because they're 70 and they're looking at their second life and they want to sell up. And then all of a sudden, these clients are then sold to a massive consolidator where you're now just a number and they know nothing about you in your life that you've built 15 years of trust with this other advisor. So I think these are really important questions for people to consider and really important thoughts for people to consider when they are thinking about working with a planner in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's unpredictable, of course, but same thing is happening here where advisors, small boutique investment advisory firms are selling their businesses. I wouldn't have called them consolidators, but maybe they are consolidators, but to just big, more impersonal financial advising firms. And there's definitely a trend of that going on here.
Which is ironic, given the conversation that we've had, saying that, 50% or more of our, planning is around the yang, the personal fulfillment is around the person, right? So if this was all about the spreadsheet, i.e. AI would dominate and it would be a robot and it would be data driven. And the more impersonable that it gets, the more I worry about the kind of these people putting them, themselves and their life at the center of their financial plans.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly, Dan, what you see is the kind of problems that senior citizens are going to experience are going to be compounded by the problems that their children might be experiencing or their grandchildren. So the issues about planning your life are going to be affected by how the lives around you are changing.
That kind of leads us. There is a link in that statement, I think, through to another thing that we talked about, and that is the very kind of widespread subject of confirmation bias, and that is kind of, the things that surround us give us the information that we believe to be true, and obviously with confirmation bias comes stuff like anchoring and hindsight bias, and we've got echo chambers and things that kind of, people would have heard. I'd love to get your thoughts, because I think this is a really important subject to spend a few minutes on, particularly if we've had a career of 30 years, 25, 30 years. There's going to be a lot of kind of built up confirmations to have biases about, isn't there? When we kind of step back from our work, maybe we've had one or two jobs and we've only been used to one or two ways of doing things, and it's been that kind of. I'm really interested in get your thoughts on that.
Let me take the first cut at that. Clearly, our strongly held beliefs are held even stronger as we get older. They become almost dogma. And changing attitudes of a 30-year-old is very, very different than trying to change an attitude of a 50 or 60-year-old. As a matter of fact, David and I have talked about this frequently, about our parents. Someone who grew up in the Great Depression, 1920s, early 1930s, was very reluctant to put money in the stock market. What they believed was the market is risky. That was their confirmation. Everything they read pointed to the market is risky, and the greatest risk they took was listening to someone else, was listening to a counter argument.
Just in general, I mean, confirmation bias is just it's a horrible trend. Thinking about people's thoughts, you have to have an open mind. You have to recognize that you might be wrong. And with confirmation bias, you only seek out others' opinions and thoughts and writings and speeches that are consistent with your own. And it just closes off your mind into thinking about that, maybe you're wrong. I mean, you have to have an open mind. And all too often, as you age, you actually regress into a more rigid way of thinking that it's my way or the highway, that I'm right. I know what's going on. I've been around for 70 or 80 years. I know a few things. And then you end up watching the same sources of news, the same sources of commentator. And it's not only political, but it's also financial. Bullishness or bearishness on the stock market, or bullishness or bearishness on a particular stock, instead of reading other people's opinions that maybe you're wrong. Someone else is, for every buyer, there's a seller, and half the people in the country are Democrats and half are Republicans. So maybe the other side has some thoughts that have some validity, and you have to have an open mind to recognize that there are two different ways of seeing most issues. It's very, very rare that one issue is so unbiasedly positive or negative that, there's only one real answer. Very few issues are like that. Most things are controversial, and you've got to open up your mind and analyze all the information out there and recognize that the other side has good arguments.
And back to the issue of strategies. What can a senior citizen do? I think that any senior citizen that decides to audit a course at a university is proving that confirmation bias can be challenged. When I look at the students I had over my 40-year career as a professor, some of the most interesting students I had were 40, 50, and 60-year-old who weren't there for the degree, but were there to simply learn something they didn't know, and were there to challenge them. And you're seeing this in some communities where senior citizens are taking courses at universities, not for credit, and I can't speak about all communities, but in many cases, these are free. They're offered by the community and the university. But confirmation bias can be debilitating, and people have to be conscious about counteracting them.
Do you think you mentioned a little bit about social media earlier on, 20 minutes or so ago, and I think the world has never been noisier, and with that, it's never been bigger, but it's never been smaller, if that makes sense. And these echo chambers are now easier to find and source. It must be easier now to find people that confirm with your beliefs, and find lots of them. Therefore, the more you find, the more you must be right. Whereas you go back 20, 30 years, you couldn't find hundreds of thousands of these people sitting in a Facebook group that you could join and then all say the same thing and all believe the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I think going into our retirement, I think there's obviously lots of talk about social media and the effect on our well-being. I think we have to be very mindful that doesn't stop when we get into retirement. I think, in fact, it could be enhanced, right? It's not just a young person thing, how social media can affect our well-being. It is very much a thing for everybody throughout the generations.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful metaphor, the metaphor being the echo chamber. Confirmation bias is about being in an echo chamber and not even realizing you're in the echo chamber. And I do believe, given our discussion of the special and unique constraints of older people, this is an issue that I think is more germane to older people than younger people.
And of course, confirmation bias just feeds into the other bias that we've discussed, which is overconfidence, because the more you hear voices that support what you're thinking, the more overconfident you become that you are right and everybody else is wrong. I say everybody else, but the other half of society is wrong.
It's absolutely fascinating. I think it's, absolutely. There's one other thing I want to touch on before we start to kind of wind it down and wrap this up. I could go on for hours. Maybe we do this again for a future episode. But I think, Lyle, you mentioned this, and David, you spoke about this when we had our conversation a couple of weeks ago. I think there's one key word that I think most retirees are looking for, and that's freedom. You both mentioned actually that there's probably two things that they're looking specifically for freedom from, and that is fear and worry. And I think that freedom from fear and worry are two very powerful statements. I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of how we can start to frame that and think about that.
Well, my first take on that is one of the reasons why scammers are able to be so successful with senior citizens is they understand what we're talking about right now about the need for senior citizens to feel free from fear. And scammers tie into that. And we see it over and over and over again, how assets are being depleted from so-called very, very smart people because a scammer has built into that. What's happening is on a purely biological basis is as we get older, we know what our bodies are doing. We know what we can no longer do. We know we don't have the stamina we once had. We know we don't have the resilience. I mean, we simply know it. We can be in denial, but we can't be in denial about what our bodies are or are not doing. And that is frightening. Losing the sense of our youth is a horrible, horrible, it's inevitable. Everyone goes through it. And the healthier people, as a matter of fact, when I think about healthy aging people, I think these are the people who are able to deal with the loss of their physical being in a way that non-healthy seniors are not.
The decision about retiring is one of these balancing acts where you retire too early and you're younger and you have the time and physical ability to enjoy life, but on the same token, you don't have any more money coming in, and the probability that you're going to run out of money increases. On the other hand, you can work into your 70s, and those valuable years that you could have retired and been enjoying all these other aspects of life, you've wasted, but you've accumulated more money. And it's very much a balancing act, trying to pick when is the optimal time to retire so that you have enough money to enjoy life and you have enough time to enjoy life during these initial years when you're retired and you want to spend money and actually can enjoy so many aspects of life.
And I'll hitchhike on what David just said. And again, this gets back to yin yang of our book and the way we look at life. There's a cost to freedom. We want freedom. We're afraid of losing it. So we buy insurance. We make sure that we have physically secure surroundings. We will tend to close our social networks. It's really a give and take. I mean, Dan, I really appreciate this opportunity. Life is all about give and take, about yin and yang, about what we are willing to pay for what we want to get.
Absolutely. I think if you think about where everything that we've talked about, and I know there are many challenges to this modern day retirement, and I've had many of my clients say something similar to me, but it's a really big task to do this by yourself. I think it's a really big, I think it's one of those events, one of those transitions, one of those life stages, one of those things that a second opinion of someone that's outside of your close circle that can hold you accountable to your dreams and aspirations, can understand your fears and anxieties, can absolutely deliver peace of mind and freedom, that can deliver that. That I think it's a really difficult emotional time to go through, and I can't imagine how people can do this by themselves without some sort of trusted advisor, friend, whatever, but someone that's not them, someone that isn't them, that can recognize their blind spots. Because I think one of the big things about biases is that, you guys could name all of the main 55 biases and heuristics. I could name a lot of them. I could tell you what they are. Doesn't mean that I don't suffer from them too, right? I know exactly, I know loss aversion it is there, and I know confirmation bias, and I know anchoring, for instance, anchoring on a price. I know all this stuff. Doesn't mean that I go, the markets are a bit high or a bit, and I have to tell myself to stop it, because everybody needs someone that isn't them, because by that definition, you can't see your own blind spots, but they can. And I think it's really important to kind of have those people in your social networks.
Dan, you've just explained the reason why financial therapy has become a movement in the financial services industry. There are some companies now that are looking at something called fractional behavioral officer, FBO, who are looking at hiring someone with the expertise you're talking about, not to go out and sell product, but to simply go out and listen and coach and counsel. I'm not sure financial therapists, the concept existed a decade ago. And I have a sense a decade from now, almost, you're going to see firms, the Vanguards and the Fidelities and the Prudentials and the TIA Craft, et cetera, who will have full-time people doing that.
Yeah.
Who maybe never had a mathematics class,
Right.
who maybe never had a finance class.
Right.
I'll add, and Lyle has spoken about this frequently, about why you shouldn't hire your relative to be your financial advisor, but have someone who's independent and can actually provide the opposing point of view, play the devil's advocate without a possible secondary motive that a family member might have.
I have one final analogy, because I know we're coming close to the end. When someone is going to have a baby, their very first baby, it's a shock. They have no idea what it's like to bring a baby into the world. And if you think about it, you've got 9 months to think about it. Mm-hmm. A baby the human gestation period is about 270 days. You got 9 months thinking about what's it going to be like. Imagine if someone took 9 months thinking about what retirement was going to be like. If someone thought of 9 months about, I'm going to be retired, I bet they think about retirement differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Along the similar lines, I've used a quote, and a good friend of mine, Paul Armstrong, who wrote a great book over here called Enough. He uses a line that says more people spend more time planning a 2-week holiday or vacation than they do spending a 30-year retirement. Right? They do that. You spend more time doing it. Listeners just should think about that. How long have you spent planning and executing your last 2-week holiday? And when did you ever start thinking about the next 30 years of your life? It's just absolute. It doesn't make sense, does it? So look, I mean, on that, I think we should. This has been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and to both of you, it's my turn to hopefully show some gratitude and say thank you for your time and your wisdom. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and get to know you over the last couple of months. And I'm massively grateful for this conversation. I know it's going to add so much value. And thank you for all the work that you've done and all the work that you're going to do going forward.
It's the value of human interaction. It's amazing how many thoughts and ideas pop into our heads just from talking.
I agree, Dan. Thank you. This has been enjoyable.
Certainly has. Absolutely.
And thank you for allowing me to include you in my new network.
Yeah, I'm a big part of that now. So you've got me forever. So that's good. I love it. Been amazing. Thank you so much. And look, thank you everybody for once again listening and tuning in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure always to have you with me today. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. We would love to have you along for the journey. If you like what you heard, then we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to leave us a review. And lastly, if you want to explore your retirement plans further, download our free 7-step retirement GPS toolkit linked in the show notes. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of TFP or Dan Haylett. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, so please always seek the advice of professionals with any questions you may have regarding your retirement.